Hi guys, welcome to the Truth Matrix, and today I'm giving you a presentation on the process of individuation. My name is DeSoto, and I will be guiding you through this presentation today. I started this YouTube channel to start informing people and giving them information that may have been occulted, meaning hidden, or just isn't known. But I feel like it has to be shared, and so here we are. So, this is a psychological presentation on mind, alchemy, and magic. Now, it's mainly on psychology, however, they all sort of tie in together. So, there's a little bit here, a little bit there. You'll see. You'll get the gist of it. I wanted to start with this quote. I feel like this quote is super important by Travis Walton. I've come to realize that the biggest problem anywhere in the world is that people's perceptions of reality are compulsively filtered through the screening mesh of what they want and what they do not want to be true. There is also a part of the brain that is made for this. So basically, reality, or your perceptions, are not entirely true. They are filtered through your brain, filtered through your mind, and then you get the picture, or whatever it is. Sensory gating is this brain mechanism. Sensory gating describes the neurological processes of filtering out what the brain perceives as redundant or unnecessary stimuli from all possible environmental stimuli. Also referred to as gating or filtering, sensory gating prevents an overload of, quote, irrelevant information in the higher cortical centers of the brain. The pulvinar nuclei of the thalamus, this is an important part of the brain, the thalamus plays a major role in attention and filters out what we call unnecessary or background information. Therefore, your reality is filtered not only through the five senses, but also through the mind. Now, this is super important because nobody knows what's going on, and I don't think anybody can know what's going on. We can make maps, we can make assumptions, we could try to figure it out, but in the end, again, everything is being filtered. So, with that said, I want to give you a definition of consciousness. Consciousness, to me, is explained away by science. It completely has no fucking clue how to really maneuver with it. So I look at consciousness as awareness. It could be substituted for it in language to take the place of the word consciousness in order to make it easier to understand. So instead of saying, oh, we're raising consciousness, we're expanding consciousness. Well, really what you're doing is you're raising your awareness and expanding your awareness, which means your attention. As the saying goes, where attention goes, energy flows. Very important. Write that down. Take notes. Take notes. So what is individuation exactly? Individuation is the process by which the individual integrates the conscious and unconscious parts of the personality. Now, this process was coined by Carl Jung, and most of this is Jungian psychology, but all of the psychoanalysts that have put out psychological models all have certain things in common. This is the one I choose to work with. I feel like Jung was very much into alchemy and the occult side of psychology and mind and matter and all that. So by bringing all of these parts into consciousness, it reveals the whole of the personality, a realization of the self. From this we get the saying, know thyself. Well, this is what to know thyself truly means. Or put simply, it is the process of becoming self-actualized or mentally mature. Okay? Now, the opposite of of individuation is cultural socialization, which takes place, meanwhile individuation is lacking. So basically, to get inducted into a culture, you go through cultural socialization, the herd thinking, focus on the herd, the pack, the group, and they take power away from the individual. They neglect the individual. They think in terms of, like I said, the herd. So cultural socialization is the lifelong process of inheriting and disseminating norms, customs, values, and ideologies, providing an individual with the skills and habits necessary for participating within a culture. So these are cultural values, these are cultural programs, it's basically cultural control, how to act in context of the culture. Culture is not your friend. That's a quote from Terence McKenna. If you don't know Terence McKenna, I highly suggest you do some research on him. He talks a lot about culture, and basically culture is very eroding to the individual. It's toxic. Obviously, it's poisoning the planet, and it's poisoning us. So therefore, we are becoming products of cultural programming rather than becoming ourselves. Now, this is why this process is important. People think they are themselves, but really they are just a collection of cultural artifacts and programming. So they're not even thinking their own thoughts. They're not even feeling their own feelings. They think they are, but they're programmed. Now, us versus the world. To change the world, we must first change ourselves. This is the process of taking a very critical look deep inside every one of our minds. That's individuation. It's severe analysis of the self. You break the self apart and you you put it back together. Everyone is different and unique, but these basic concepts apply to all. Solve coagula. This is alchemy, and this is kind of how this relates to alchemy. In a very simplistic way, please. This is not a presentation to go in extreme detail. I will make other videos to go into more depth about all of these subjects. But essentially, you are not a complete person until you undergo this process of separation and reintegration. You are not yet aware of your true self. This is the process of alchemy, of self-transformation. Solve coagula, the breaking down and the coming together. The dissolve, purification, and then coagulation. Most people confuse the self with the persona or the ego, which are simply, not to reduce it to just this, but the ego and the persona are different parts of the psyche, and so they could easily be confused. I mean, if you can't see inside of your mind, then it's hard to know. You have to map your mind. So, individuation is another reason why you may wish to undertake this process, the great work. Individuation has a holistic healing effect on mental and physical health. Not only do I think we need this process now more than ever, but why do we need it? 1, to become a complete mentally and spiritually involved individual. And 2, never before in history have we ever had such a vast knowledge of everything in the universe, yet we know nothing of ourselves or what we are as a species. Third, and finally, we are children. Yeah, you. I'm not saying everyone, but most grown men and women are mentally, spiritually children. This idea comes not only from him, but from what I'm sourcing it from, Aleister Crowley. I'll give a quote in the next slide. But we are ruled by this god Horus. Now, in the Egyptian pantheon, Horus is the son of Osiris and Isis, and he is the child. A combination of the twin gods, Ra-Hor-Khuit and Hor-Par-Karat. The meaning of this doctrine must be studied in magic. He's symbolized as a hawk-headed god, enthroned. Now, why this is important? I know it seems kind of disconnected, but trust me, it's all connected. These quotes are from the Book of the Law, written in 1904 by Aleister Crowley, but supposedly channeled from a higher spirit. Now, Horus rules the present period of 2,000 years, beginning in 1904. Everywhere his government is taking root. Observe for yourselves the decay of the sense of sin, the growth of innocence and irresponsibility, the strange modifications of the reproductive instinct with a tendency to become bisexual or epicene, the childlike confidence in progress combined with the nightmare fear of catastrophe against which we are yet half unwilling to take precautions. Under the outcrop of dictatorships only possible when moral growth is in its earliest stages, and the prevalence of infantile cults like communism, fascism, pacifism, health crazes, occultism in nearly all its forms, religions sentimentalized to the point of practical extinction. Consider the popularity of the cinema, the wireless, the football pools, and guessing competitions, all devices for soothing fractious infants, no seed of purpose in them. Consider sport, the babyish enthusiasms and rages which it excites, whole nations disturbed by disputes between boys. Consider war, the atrocities which occur daily and leave us unmoved and hardly worried. We are children. These are the attitudes and behaviors of children. Not infants, children. We could say galactic children, planetary children. We as a unit are children. We are now evolving. These are times of higher consciousness. And what did I say consciousness is? Higher awareness. So, here's a picture of Horus with a little, I don't know what you want to call that, prayer maybe. Above us today hangs a danger never met parallel in history. We suppress the individual in more and more ways. We think in terms of the herd. War no longer kills soldiers. It kills all indiscriminately. Every new measure of the most democratic and autocratic government is communistic in essence. It is always restriction. We are all treated as imbecile children. DORA, the Shops Act, the motoring laws, Sunday suffocation, the censorship. They won't trust us to cross the roads at will. Fascism is like communism, and dishonest into the bargain. The dictators suppress all art, literature, theater, news that does not meet the requirements. Yet the world only moves by the light of genius. The herd will be destroyed in mass. This is why we need to wake up. This book is from 1904. 1904. And it's pretty much describing exactly what is going on today. Exactly. So, moving on. Now we're going to start getting into the real nit-grit of this presentation. What Jung calls the archetypes and archetypal events. Jung described archetypal events such as birth, death, separation from parents, initiation, marriage, the union of opposites, and more. So these are just kind of these events that have been prevalent throughout history always. They're archetypal. An archetypal figure would be the great mother, the father, the child, the devil, God, the old wise man, the old wise woman, the trickster, the hero. Also, archetypal motifs. None of these are all limited to. They go on and on and on. The apocalypse, the creation, the deluge. I don't know what that is. Although the number of archetypes is limitless, there are a few particularly notable reoccurring archetypal images. The chief among them being the shadow, the old wise man, the child, the mother, the maiden, and lastly the anima in man and the animus in women. Alternatively, he would speak of the emergence of certain definitive archetypes: the shadow, the animal, the wise old man, the anima, the animus, the mother, the child, etc. So, all this will tie in. I'm going to throw little bits and pieces, rewind the video, and once it's over, hopefully it'll all make some sense to you. So watch this whole thing in its entirety, please. Please don't skip through parts. It's all meant to be watched together. So, one basic concept in psychology is, are you an introvert or an extrovert? Well, they're very different. Here's a chart. Extroversion is energized by the outer world and socialization, outgoing, talkative, acts first, thinks later, values, breathe experience. Introversion is energized by the inner world, isolation, inward going, quiet, thinks and may act, values depth of experience. You probably identify with more than one than the other, but everyone is somewhere along the spectrum. They can be anywhere. You don't have to be necessarily one or the other. You could be leaning towards one or the other. There's some other stuff about their preferences here. I'm not going to go into that. It's just kind of to give you a general idea. So in turn, extroverts are external people. Introverts are more internal people. I am an internal person. Now here's a little map of the psyche, the framework of individuation. The ego, first off, is our adaptation to pain and trauma. It evolves as a defense against the outer world. It's almost who you pretend to be. Almost. It's an adaptation. It is not you. The persona, which is seen at this lower, or outside of the ego. So the persona protects the ego, which protects the self. Then behind the self is the shadow and the animus and the animal. So the persona is the mask to shield our ego and the self from the outer world. So everything is basically going through the persona, if you have not yet taken off the mask, through the ego to the self. So the shadow, now behind the self, is the opposite of the ego. It's the dark ego, the dark side of unacknowledged, suppressed, and undealt with thoughts and tendencies. The anima or animus behind the shadow is either the feminine or male part of the psyche. A male has a female part of the psyche, and the male, or vice versa. Basically, regardless whether you're male or female, you have the other aspects of the opposite gender within you. We have both, as follows the natural law principle of nature. This is Jung's model of the psyche. Here we have the collective consciousness and collective unconscious. So yeah, if you're not conscious of it, which is basically the whole backside of the psyche, you must become conscious. This is everything. All of these are part of you. I can't describe them to you exactly how they are for you because it's very personal. This is a very personal process of self-transformation. So you kind of have to identify parts of yourself with it and start sort of mapping it out a little bit and getting a feel for when you're putting up your personas and what your how your ego works and tries to manipulate, and the shadow and how to integrate that and not suppress the shadow. So here we have further expanded the parts of the psyche. The persona, again, is derived from the Latin word mask. The different social masks worn in different situations, how differently you act in front of different people in different situations. It's a form of protection. Now the anima and animus. Anima is feminine, animus is masculine. So if you're a male, you have the anima. If you're a female, you'll have the masculine, animus. Now the opposite gender qualities and attributes of the psyche represent true self, combinations, synergies. This goes with the natural law principles of gender. God does not have a gender. Neither do our minds, only our physical bodies. So the shadow is the dark side of the psyche, consists of repressed memories, ideas, emotions, weaknesses, desires, instincts. Represents wildness, chaos, and the unknown. Now how this fits in with cultural socialization. In socialization, you have to learn how to act within that culture. So therefore, anything that doesn't fit in with that culture's programming and how they want everything to be, it becomes suppressed. Because you can't act that way. You can't do those things. You can't think that way. So then you push it all to the back of your mind, but it never goes away. It's always there. It's a matter of tapping into it. Now the self is the unification of the conscious and unconscious, individuation and self-actualization. Contains all aspects of the individual. So the self is the center. Everything else goes around. You must unify all of these parts. If you don't think you have a dark side, well, you better look again. If you don't think you put up a persona and you think that's the real you, well, think again, because it's not. These are natural things that people do. It's a part of us. They're our mental habits, our mental infrastructure, our mental framework, whatever. Now, the self I want to talk about first because, well, it's the most important part. The self has an inherited tendency to move toward growth, perfection, and completion. It is a component of the psyche that attempts to harmonize all other components. Okay? Self-actualization. A person striving for unity, wholeness, and integration of the total personality. To actualize or fully experience the self, people must overcome their fear of the unconscious, prevent their persona from dominating their personality, recognize the dark side of themselves, the shadow, and then muster even greater courage to face their anima or animus. So let me say that one more time. To fully experience the self, you must overcome the fear of the unconscious, prevent the persona from dominating the personality, and recognize the dark side of themselves. Also muster the courage to face the anima or animus. Now, I know this might sound a little airy-fairy or whatever, but once you start getting into the process and really putting the pieces together and doing the self-work necessary for growth and development and for the betterment of yourself and the world, you'll see. Now, the shadow, like we said, is the rejected and repressed aspects of yourself. It is the part of yourself you do not want the world to see because it is ugly or unappealing. It symbolizes weakness, fear, anger. In dreams, it's represented by a stalker, murderer, pursuer. It can be a frightening figure, or even a close friend or relative. The appearance often makes you angry and leaves you scared. They force you to confront things that you don't want to see or hear. You must learn to accept the shadow aspect of yourself, for its messages are often for your own good, even though it may not be immediately apparent. So what this is saying, that the shadow is not evil. Okay? The shadow is not evil. It is not darkness. Well, it is dark. It's on the dark side of the unconscious, we'll say. But darkness is not evil. You cannot have darkness without light. They are unity. They are one. Different manifestations of the same energy. Do not be afraid. Now, the ego is responsible for feelings of identity and continuity. This is where your sense of identity comes from. It's who you think you are. It contains conscious thoughts of your own behavior, feelings, memories of your experience. The conscious mind is what we're most familiar with. When you're awake and waking consciousness, this is what you have. Your ego is present. But you cannot let your ego dominate, because the ego is not you, and the persona is not you. Now moving on to the anima and animus. The anima is positive, patient, compassionate, tender, nurturing, intuitive, etc., loving, considerate. Its negative side is moody, uncertainty, insecurity, hypersensitivity. And the animus is positive, assertive, thoughtful, rational, powerful, courage, objective, honorable, wise. Its negatives are ruthless, opinionated, destructive, brutal, reckless, cold. So they're very opposite. But it's very important to come in touch with both of these and to realize these. Now we're going to go into some levels of the psyche I was talking about. The conscious, the unconscious, the collective unconscious, the personal unconscious. So we'll start with the consciousness first. Jung saw the ego as the center of consciousness, but not the core of personality. Ego is not the whole personality, but must be completed by the more comprehensive self, the center of the personality that is largely unconscious. The consciousness plays a minor role in analytical psychology. Now, for the personal unconscious, since this is where it starts to get a little unfamiliar, it embraces of all repressed, forgotten, or subliminary perceived experiences of one particular individual. This is the personal unconscious. It collects and contains repressed infantile memories and impulses, forgotten events and experiences originally perceived below our threshold of consciousness. Our personal unconscious is formed by our individual experience. Complexes is an emotionally toned conglomeration of associated ideas. This is also similar to a complex mimetic structure. They call them complexes. This is stuff for another video on mimetics, which I will get into. And last, we have the collective unconscious, which is quite haunting, mystical, the other, whatever you want to call it, has roots in the ancestral past of the entire species. The physical contents of the collective unconscious are inherited and passed from one generation to the next as psychic potential. Okay? So these are things unconsciously passed on, inherited from our ancestors. It is a collective experience during a revolutionary past or the accumulation of ancestral experiences. This affects a person's thoughts, emotions, and actions. Okay? So the collective unconscious is the unconscious of the entire species, which we are starting to confront now in history with Donald Trump representing the shadow self of America. And I'll go into this stuff in another video, but again, this is for another time. The personal unconscious is just like the collective, but on a personal level, or your subconscious, whatever you'd like to call it. Remember, the map is not the territory. And the conscious, your normal waking, thinking, awareness. So you must take off the mask, realize the persona, who you pretend to be around others. Okay, not who you are, but who you pretend to be. Dissolution of the outer persona. This is the first and foremost thing that must happen and that must be done. The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough a kind of mask, designed on one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other hand to conceal the true nature of the individual. Excuse me. So the persona is a concealing mechanism. Okay. It's sneaky almost. You could learn to use personas in different social situations to kind of feel them out and swap through them, but it's important to know when you're using the persona and when it is in effect. When the mask is dissolved, the false self will fall away. You will then be able to confront the shadow self. In alchemy, this would be called the negredo, the blackness, decomposition. The shadow are the parts of you that have been suppressed, ignored by the conscious mind. Nonetheless, they are still a part of you. We also have a collective shadow, which I just talked about, so which I see Donald Trump being a representation of. More on this in another video. We're constantly in this society, and in most societies that are strict and rule off of authority and slavery and restriction, we are constantly having to suppress one attribute or another in our lives. Therefore, the shadow can never be completely assimilated into consciousness. However, it is of utmost importance that the most conspicuous aspects of the shadow be raised to consciousness so it can invigorate the ego. Invigorate the ego, not hide and mask the ego, but empower the ego. This is what's important. To do this means taking an extremely critical and objective look into the nature of one's own being. Thus, it is very difficult for some to accept the fact that they truly do have a deep, dark side. Those who cannot face the unconscious self stop the process cold and withdraw back into the comfortable old self-deceptions. This is what's happening with our rulers, our masters, our authority figures, our police, our military. They stop the process cold because they refuse to see the dark side that is a part of them and a part of us. They hide from it. They act as if it's not there, living in ignorance. These are ignorant people. We need this to stop. The world is being destroyed by stupid, ignorant masses. Without this process of individuation, no spiritual progress is made. The shadow is a natural part of ourselves and nothing to be ashamed of or feel guilty about. Guilt and shame often cause one to repress the shadow in the first place, allowing a small undesirable trait to grow into a huge unresolved conflict, compulsion, or neurosis. Also, disease. When you get diseases, it filters spiritually, mentally, physically. So usually they are caused by something of a higher place, we'll say. In some ways, the shadow is like a child who is resented and neglectful. If shown kindness and understanding, they can learn to play with the other children and to love and to care. This is what needs to be done. To end this presentation, I would like to say that it is up to each and every individual, every one of you and every one of us, to take up this great work of self-transformation for the benefit of the world and ourselves. We cannot remain children. We cannot trade our freedom for security no longer. We cannot let others control our minds by methods that we are unaware of. We must raise awareness, raise consciousness up to the level that we could even the playing field. This is what I want to do. The process of individuation lays the framework for future presentations and the evolution of our species itself. It is wise to remember that the map is not the territory. However, this map I have provided can lead to immense self-realization and deep introspection. The time for change and growth is now. So, I hope this presentation was helpful to you guys, and I hope you come away from it with some knowledge about yourself. Not about these concepts and this stuff, but about yourself. Because what I'm talking about here is you. What I'm talking about here is me. What I'm talking about is us. We need to realize that. We are all one. Until we are all awake and self-realized, none of us are awake and self-realized. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your support and your time. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Please subscribe to the Truth Matrix, like and share this video, and there will be more soon to come. Thank you.